Welcome to the Sleep Narrator. I know you use these videos to drift off into slumber, so before you close your eyes, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time is it for you right now.
Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind wander as I tell your story. The Man in the Wall. It wasn't the kind of house that caught your eye. Not in the usual way, at least. The siding was a tired shade of white. The shutters hung at lazy angles, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle like an old man remembering a younger posture. But something about it spoke to him, not in words, just a low hum of familiarity, like the way a half-forgotten song can drift through the back of your mind. Chapter 1. The House on Elder Pine Road. The first time Nathaniel Crow saw the house, it was late autumn. The trees had just begun to shed their last reluctant leaves, and the air held that quiet, brittle cold that didn't quite bite, but whispered of winter's approach. The house sat at the end of Elder Pine Road, where the sidewalk turned to gravel, and the road itself seemed to forget it had somewhere to go. He moved in on a Wednesday. The air was thick with wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the clouds loomed low, but did not rain. He brought only what he could fit in his car: 3 boxes of books, an electric kettle, a single armchair with a coffee stain on the cushion, and a faded photograph of his father tucked into a worn leather wallet. And the house on Elder Pine Road offered just that: anonymity, quiet, and crucially, a basement. Nathaniel had come to the sleepy town of Farrow Glen, not looking for a new life exactly, but perhaps to put enough space between him and the old one, the sort of space measured not in miles, but in silence. After his father passed, and the city began to feel louder than usual, it felt necessary to go where time didn't move so fast, where no one asked questions, and no one needed answers. Inside, the house creaked with every step, like it was surprised to be inhabited again. There were no ghosts, not the dramatic kind anyway, but there was something else, a stillness, a waiting, as though the house had taken a breath and was holding it. Nathaniel didn't mind. He was quiet too. The basement became his refuge, almost immediately. The stairs were steep and slightly crooked, the handrail loose at one end. The light bulb overhead flickered the way old bulbs do. Reluctantly obeying the switch, the walls were cinder block, painted in a shade of green that no longer had a name. One wall in particular drew his attention. It was different, partly bricked but uneven, like it had been patched hastily. He ran his hand across it, cold, slightly damp, but nothing more. He didn't ask questions. The first night passed without event. No rattling chains, no flickering figures at the end of the bed, just the sound of distant wind and the groan of old floorboards, adjusting to company. Nathaniel lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin, making him hyper-aware of his breath, his pulse, the slow beating of a heart, trying to settle into its new rhythm. Not then. He fell asleep around 2:11 a.m. and dreamed of nothing. The second night, however, was different. It started with a sound, faint, rhythmic, like someone gently tapping, not loud, not insistent, just persistent. He opened his eyes. The clock read 2:13 a.m. He listened. Tap, pause. Tap, tap, long pause. The sound came from the floor beneath him, from the basement. He sat up, blinking in the dark. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, like a heavy curtain. He told himself it was the pipes. Old houses do that. They make noises, settle in strange ways. He didn't go downstairs, not that night, but sleep didn't come easily afterward. The third night brought a dream. He stood in a hallway, narrow, dark, wooden panels on the walls. At the far end stood a man, tall, wearing a faded army jacket. His face was turned away, and he seemed to be listening to something on the other side of the wall. Nathaniel took a step toward him. The man turned, slowly.
Roughly 17 a.m.
But before Nathaniel could see his face, he woke up. He was sweating, and the house felt colder than usual. He didn't move, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the dream still heavy behind his eyes. The next morning, over a mug of lukewarm tea, Nathaniel stood again before the basement wall. The uneven bricks, the slight patchiness, something was behind it. Maybe pipes, maybe old insulation. He didn't touch it. Or maybe a man who once stood very still, listening for someone to find him. Not yet, but he began to listen. Every night. Chapter 2. The voice without words. He never went down to check while it was happening. It always came after 2 in the morning, like clockwork. A tapping barely perceptible, just soft enough to be mistaken for a draft, brushing against something hollow. It never lasted more than a minute. Sometimes it was steady. 1, 2, pause. Other times it came in short flurries, like fingers drumming nervously on a table. By the 5th night, Nathaniel had begun to expect the sound. He wanted to. The urge gnawed at him each time he lay frozen in bed, heart thumping in the dim blue light of his phone screen. But something older than reason told him not to go just yet. The house didn't feel threatening. That was the strange part. In fact, it felt gentle, lonely even, as though it too were listening. That's when the dream started changing. The hallway returned, clearer now. The same narrow corridor, lined with old photographs, that grew less blurry with each visit. The man was always there, never walking, never speaking, standing with his back to Nathaniel, in front of that same bricked wall. But now, Nathaniel could hear something, not from the man, but around him, a whisper, almost too quiet to understand, as if spoken underwater. A name, maybe, or a place, or both. It came in fragments, scattered and soaked with grief. And each time he woke, he wrote down what he could remember. George, basement. No voice left. On the 7th morning, he found this in his notebook. Nathaniel didn't know anyone named George. Not recently. Not in his family. Not in his circle of old colleagues. He Googled it. Of course, George Ferroglen, missing persons, veterans, anything. Nothing came up not connected. Just noise, data, lost names without faces. But he began noticing other things. In the daytime, the basement wall felt colder than the rest. It seemed to draw in the heat like a sponge. And once, when he brought down a cup of tea, the surface of the liquid rippled. No wind, no footsteps above, just a ripple, like something shifted behind the wall.
He started leaving a notebook on a small table down there, just in case.
He wasn't sure why. By the 2nd week, Nathaniel was no longer sleeping properly. The dreams became richer. He began seeing more of the man, not just his back now, but flashes of profile, details of his clothes, heavy boots, worn belt, sleeves rolled at the forearm like he had worked with his hands. There was a sadness to his posture, a kind of stillness that came not from peace, but resignation. "Who are you?" he asked. In one dream, Nathaniel tried speaking, The man turned, not fully, just enough for Nathaniel to see that his mouth did not move. His lips were sewn shut. He raised a finger, not in warning, but as if to say, "Wait." Nathaniel woke up gasping, not in fear, but with an overwhelming sense of empathy. This was no monster in his dreams. This was someone waiting to be remembered. That same day, Nathaniel went into town. Barrow Glen had one library, barely used, tucked behind the post office, the kind of place where dust had seniority, and the books still bore index cards in paper sleeves. A woman named Carol worked the front desk, white hair in a bun, glasses on a chain, a sweater for every day of the year. She peered over the rim of her glasses. Not much to read about, I'm afraid. Most of those records are older than me. I'm looking for history on Elder Pine Road, he said. He explained the address. Her expression changed, barely, but enough. That house, she said, drawing out the word that a little too long. You bought the old Carroll place. Carroll? George Carroll, Korean War vet, went missing years ago. Just vanished. Left behind a wife and 4 kids. No body, no explanation. Some people thought he ran off. Others thought. She shrugged. Well, people think strange things in small towns. Nathaniel felt a pulse behind his eyes. Did they ever find him? She did. A yellowed article from the Ferry Glen Gazette, dated October 1961. Carol shook her head. No, not officially. The house was sold eventually, changed hands a few times. Most people didn't stay long, not haunted. Exactly, just tired. He asked if she had any clippings or records. Local man vanishes without trace. Wife fears the worst.
George Carroll.
Last seen in his home. Children asleep upstairs. No note, no struggle. Just gone that night. Nathaniel brought the clipping into the basement. He sat quietly. The only sound, the hum of the furnace upstairs. Then he spoke, not loudly, but clearly, like he was introducing himself to someone sitting just on the other side of the wall. He laid it on the table beside the notebook. I know your name now, he said. 2 slow knocks against the bricks. Then a tap, silence. Something was listening. Nathaniel closed his eyes. And maybe, just maybe, it was ready to be heard.
Chapter 3, Things Left Behind.
The next morning, Nathaniel found the notebook in the basement had been moved. It hadn't been left on the table, as he remembered. It now rested on the small stool near the bricked wall, a place he hadn't approached in days. And on its open page, a sentence had been scrawled unmistakably in his own handwriting. I am still here. But he didn't remember writing it. He stared at the words for a long time, feeling neither fear nor disbelief, just a curious, hollow kind of ache, the same ache he used to feel when standing outside his father's hospice room, unsure whether to go in or let him sleep. There was a presence in this house, not something evil or vengeful, something forgotten, something patient. Later that day, Nathaniel took a walk down Elder Pine Road. The trees swayed without breeze. The air smelled faintly of rust and pine. It was one of those autumn afternoons when everything felt wrapped in gauze, like the world was remembering itself in slow motion. He touched the bricks again. They were dry now, less cold, almost warm beneath his fingers. He passed a man walking a dog, an older gentleman with thick glasses and a faded baseball cap. The dog stopped near Nathaniel's feet, sniffing, tail frozen, mid-wag. That old Carroll place, isn't it? The man said, without introduction. Nathaniel nodded. Yes, strange history with that one. He glanced at the house. barely visible through thinning branches. George was a good man, quiet. Till his time in Korea came back different, though. Real quiet after that, kept to himself. Then one day, just gone. Did anyone suspect anything? The man shook his head. They talked. Of course they talked. Some said he ran. Others said the wife knew more than she let on, but there was no evidence. No note. No signs of foul play. Just gone.
And his wife?
She stayed a while, but something broke in her. She started sleeping in the upstairs hallway, like she was afraid of the walls. The youngest kid told the school nurse. He heard his father whispering through the vents. Nathaniel felt a chill at that. That night, he went to the basement again. He brought a chair and placed it before the bricked wall. They eventually left. House sat empty for a long time. Some renters after that, but no one stayed long. Nathaniel thanked him and continued on. The dog's bark, echoing faintly as he walked back up the cracked path to his front door.
No tapping came. No dreams. No shifting shadows.
He sat for hours, just quiet. Still, he spoke calmly, like talking to an old friend across a table. No response. I know about the disappearance, he said. I know about George Carroll. I know your family waited. It was the faintest sensation. A tremor, not physical, but emotional, as if the wall had sighed or remembered. And then, just beneath his palm, something shifted. He reached out and gently touched the bricks again. That night, the dream returned. The man in the military jacket stood before it again, but this time, the hallway was different. Wider, more detailed, family photographs lined the walls, some tilted, some missing. Nathaniel felt himself walking past a coat rack, past a small child's shoe, toward the door at the end. But now he turned fully.
And for the first time, Nathaniel saw his face.
Wan, kind, tired beyond words, eyes deep with apology. George Carroll raised a hand. Only this time, not to signal wait. Then he mouthed something. He pointed downward. Nathaniel awoke. The image burning in his mind, his breath hitched in the quiet darkness. He grabbed his notebook. He wrote 3 words below the floor. The next day, Nathaniel gathered tools from the hardware store. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing, just that he had a project, something long overdue. Chapter 4. Beneath the silence. That morning, he stood quietly in the basement, the toolbox at his feet, staring at the wall like a man trying to remember a dream. There was something sacred about the silence now, not the kind that demanded stillness, but the kind that invited reverence, a hush you might find in an empty church or a forest clearing at dawn.
Nathaniel didn't rush.
He knelt beside the wall, running his fingers along the base where the bricks met the concrete floor. He noticed for the first time a fine hairline crack stretching from the bottom corner outward. Not a structural crack. No, this was different, intentional, maybe, concealed. He began tapping along the bottom edge. Some parts rang solid, others sounded hollow.
Welcome to the Sleep Narrator. I know you use these videos to drift off into slumber, so before you close your eyes, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time is it for you right now.
Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind wander as I tell your story. The Man in the Wall. Chapter 1. The House on Elder Pine Road. The first time Nathaniel Crow saw the house, it was late autumn. The trees had just begun to shed their last reluctant leaves, and the air held that quiet, brittle cold that didn't quite bite, but whispered of winter's approach. The house sat at the end of Elder Pine Road, where the sidewalk turned to gravel, and the road itself seemed to forget it had somewhere to go. It wasn't the kind of house that caught your eye. Not in the usual way, at least. The siding was a tired shade of white, the shutters hung at lazy angles, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle like an old man remembering a younger posture. But something about it spoke to him, not in words, just a low hum of familiarity, like the way a half-forgotten song can drift through the back of your mind. Nathaniel had come to the sleepy town of Farrow Glen, not looking for a new life exactly, but perhaps to put enough space between him and the old one, the sort of space measured not in miles, but in silence after his father passed, and the city began to feel louder than usual. It felt necessary to go where time didn't move so fast, where no one asked questions, and no one needed answers, and the house on Elder Pine Road offered just that. Anonymity, quiet, and crucially, a basement. He moved in on a Wednesday. The air was thick with wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the clouds loomed low, but did not rain. He brought only what he could fit in his car: 3 boxes of books, an electric kettle, a single armchair with a coffee stain on the cushion, and a faded photograph of his father tucked into a worn leather wallet. Inside, the house creaked with every step, like it was surprised to be inhabited again. There were no ghosts, not the dramatic kind anyway, but there was something else, a stillness, a waiting, as though the house had taken a breath and was holding it. Nathaniel didn't mind. He was quiet too. The basement became his refuge, almost immediately. The stairs were steep and slightly crooked, the handrail loose at one end. The light bulb overhead flickered the way old bulbs do. Reluctantly obeying the switch, the walls were cinder block, painted in a shade of green that no longer had a name. One wall in particular drew his attention. It was different, partly bricked, but uneven, like it had been patched hastily. He ran his hand across it, cold, slightly damp, but nothing more. He didn't ask questions, not then. The first night passed, without event. No rattling chains, no flickering figures at the end of the bed, just the sound of distant wind and the groan of old floorboards, adjusting to company. Nathaniel lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin, making him hyper-aware of his breath, his pulse, the slow beating of a heart, trying to settle into its new rhythm. He fell asleep around 2:11 a.m. and dreamed of nothing. The second night, however, was different. It started with a sound, faint, rhythmic, like someone gently tapping, not loud, not insistent, just persistent. He opened his eyes. The clock read 2:13 a.m. He listened. Tap, pause. Tap, tap. Long pause. The sound came from the floor beneath him, from the basement. He sat up, blinking in the dark. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, like a heavy curtain. He told himself it was the pipes. Old houses do that. They make noises, settle in strange ways. He didn't go downstairs, not that night, but sleep didn't come easily afterward. The third night brought a dream. He stood in a hallway, narrow, dark, wooden panels on the walls. At the far end stood a man, tall, wearing a faded army jacket. His face was turned away, and he seemed to be listening to something on the other side of the wall. Nathaniel took a step toward him. The man turned, slowly, but before Nathaniel could see his face, he woke up.
3:17 a.m.
He was sweating, and the house felt colder than usual. He didn't move, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the dream still heavy behind his eyes. The next morning, over a mug of lukewarm tea, Nathaniel stood again before the basement wall. With the uneven bricks, the slight patchiness, something was behind it. Maybe pipes, maybe old insulation, or maybe a man who once stood very still, listening for someone to find him. He didn't touch it, not yet, but he began to listen. Every night. Chapter 2, The Voice Without Words. By the fifth night, Nathaniel had begun to expect the sound. It always came after 2 in the morning, like clockwork, a tapping barely perceptible, just soft enough to be mistaken for a draft, brushing against something hollow. It never lasted more than a minute. Sometimes it was steady. 1, 2, pause. Other times it came in short flurries, like fingers drumming nervously on a table. He never went down to check while it was happening. He wanted to. The urge gnawed at him each time he lay frozen in bed, heart thumping in the dim blue light of his phone screen. But something older than reason told him not to go just yet. The house didn't feel threatening. That was the strange part. In fact, it felt gentle, lonely even, as though it too were listening. That's when the dream started changing. The hallway returned, clearer now. The same narrow corridor, lined with old photographs, that grew less blurry with each visit. The man was always there, never walking, never speaking, standing with his back to Nathaniel, in front of that same bricked wall. But now, Nathaniel could hear something, not from the man, but around him, a whisper, almost too quiet to understand, as if spoken underwater. A name, maybe, or a place, or both. It came in fragments, scattered and soaked with grief. And each time he woke, he wrote down what he could remember. On the 7th morning, he found this in his notebook. George, basement. No voice left. Nathaniel didn't know anyone named George. Not recently. Not in his family. Not in his circle of old colleagues. He Googled it. Of course, George Ferroglen. Missing persons. Veterans. Anything. Nothing came up dot connected. Just noise. Data. Lost names without faces. But he began noticing other things. In the daytime, the basement wall felt colder than the rest. It seemed to draw in the heat like a sponge. And once, when he brought down a cup of tea, the surface of the liquid rippled. No wind, no footsteps above, just a ripple, like something shifted behind the wall.
He started leaving a notebook on a small table down there, just in case.
He wasn't sure why. By the second week, Nathaniel was no longer sleeping properly. The dreams became richer. He began seeing more of the man, not just his back now, but flashes of profile, details of his clothes, heavy boots, worn belt, sleeves rolled at the forearm like he had worked with his hands. There was a sadness to his posture, a kind of stillness that came not from peace, but resignation. In one dream, Nathaniel tried speaking. "Who are you?" he asked. The man turned, not fully, just enough for Nathaniel to see that his mouth did not move. His lips were sewn shut. He raised a finger, not in warning, but as if to say, "Wait." Nathaniel woke up gasping, not in fear, but with an overwhelming sense of empathy. This was no monster in his dreams. This was someone waiting to be remembered. That same day, Nathaniel went into town. Farrow Glen had one library, barely used, tucked behind a post office, the kind of place where dust had seniority, and the books still bore index cards in paper sleeves. A woman named Carol worked the front desk, white hair in a bun, glasses on a chain, a sweater for every day of the year. "I'm looking for history on Elder Pine Road," he said. She peered over the rim of her glasses. "Not much to read about, I'm afraid. Most of those records are older than me." He explained the address. Her expression changed, barely, but enough. "That house," she said, drawing out the word that a little too long. "You bought the old Carroll place." "Carroll?" "George Carroll, Korean war vet, went missing years ago, just vanished, left behind a wife and 4 kids. No body, no explanation. Some people thought he ran off, others thought." She shrugged. "Well, people think strange things in small towns." Nathaniel felt a pulse behind his eyes. "Did they ever find him?" Carol shook her head. "No, not officially. The house was sold eventually, changed hands a few times. Most people didn't stay long, not haunted. Exactly, just tired." He asked if she had any clippings or records. She did. A yellowed article from the Ferry Glen Gazette, dated October 1961. "Local man vanishes without trace. Wife fears the worst.
George Carroll.
Last seen in his home. Children asleep upstairs. No note, no struggle. Just gone that night." Nathaniel brought the clipping into the basement. He laid it on the table beside the notebook. He sat quietly. The only sound, the hum of the furnace upstairs. Then he spoke, not loudly, but clearly, like he was introducing himself to someone sitting just on the other side of the wall. "I know your name now," he said. Silence. Then the tap, 2 slow knocks against the bricks. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Something was listening, and maybe, just maybe, it was ready to be heard.
Chapter 3, Things Left Behind.
The next morning, Nathaniel found the notebook in the basement had been moved. It hadn't been left on the table, as he remembered. It now rested on the small stool near the bricked wall, a place he hadn't approached in days, and on its open page, a sentence had been scrawled unmistakably in his own handwriting. "I am still here." But he didn't remember writing it. He stared at the words for a long time, feeling neither fear nor disbelief, just a curious, hollow kind of ache, the same ache he used to feel when standing outside his father's hospice room, unsure whether to go in or let him sleep. There was a presence in this house, not something evil or vengeful, something forgotten, something patient. He touched the bricks again. They were dry now, less cold, almost warm beneath his fingers. Later that day, Nathaniel took a walk down Elder Pine Road. The trees swayed without breeze. The air smelled faintly of rust and pine. It was one of those autumn afternoons when everything felt wrapped in gauze, like the world was remembering itself in slow motion. He passed a man walking a dog, an older gentleman with thick glasses and a faded baseball cap. The dog stopped near Nathaniel's feet, sniffing, tail frozen, mid-wag. "That old Carroll place, isn't it?" the man said, without introduction. Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, strange history with that one." He glanced at the house, barely visible through thinning branches. George was a good man, quiet. Did his time in Korea came back different, though. Real quiet after that, kept to himself. Then one day, just gone. Did anyone suspect anything? The man shook his head. They talked. Of course they talked. Some said he ran. Others said the wife knew more than she let on, but there was no evidence. No note, no signs of foul play, just gone.
And his wife?
She stayed a while, but something broke in her. She started sleeping in the upstairs hallway, like she was afraid of the walls. The youngest kid told the school nurse he heard his father whispering through the vents. Nathaniel felt a chill at that. They eventually left. House sat empty for a long time. Some renters after that, but no one stayed long. Nathaniel thanked him and continued on. The dog's bark echoing faintly as he walked back up the cracked path to his front door. That night, he went to the basement again. He brought a chair and placed it before the bricked wall. He sat for hours.
No tapping came, no dreams, no shifting shadows.
Just quiet. Still, he spoke calmly, like talking to an old friend across a table. I know about the disappearance, he said. I know about George Carroll. I know your family waited. No response. He reached out and gently touched the bricks again. And then, just beneath his palm, something shifted. It was the faintest sensation. A tremor, not physical, but emotional, as if the wall had sighed or remembered. That night, the dream returned. But this time, the hallway was different. Wider, more detailed, family photographs lined the walls, some tilted, some missing. Nathaniel felt himself walking past a coat rack, past a small child's shoe, toward the door at the end. The man in the military jacket stood before it again, but now he turned fully.
And for the first time, Nathaniel saw his face.
Wan, kind, tired beyond words, eyes deep with apology. George Carroll raised a hand. Only this time, not to signal wait. He pointed downward. Then he mouthed something. Nathaniel awoke. The image burning in his mind, his breath hitched in the quiet darkness. He grabbed his notebook. He wrote 3 words below the floor. The next day, Nathaniel gathered tools from the hardware store. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing, just that he had a project, something long overdue. Chapter 4. Beneath the Silence.
Nathaniel didn't rush.
That morning, he stood quietly in the basement, the toolbox at his feet, staring at the wall like a man trying to remember a dream. There was something sacred about the silence now, not the kind that demanded stillness, but the kind that invited reverence, a hush you might find in an empty church or a forest clearing at dawn. He knelt beside the wall, running his fingers along the base where the bricks met the concrete floor. He noticed for the first time a fine hairline crack stretching from the bottom corner outward. Not a structural crack. No, this was different, intentional, maybe, concealed. He began tapping along the bottom edge. Some parts rang solid, others sounded hollow. He marked those spots with chalk. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he began chipping away. The first brick came loose with surprising ease. Behind it, dust billowed, like breath, held for too long. The air had a strange texture, cooler, denser, tinged with something metallic and old. As he pried away the second and third bricks, a shallow cavity began to reveal itself. It wasn't a room, not yet, more like a pocket, a void. In that void, something gleamed faintly. Nathaniel paused. He reached in and pulled it out. A dog tag, rusted, faded. The name was barely legible. Carroll G. Corporals, U.S. Army. His throat tightened. It was like finding a memory someone tried to bury. There was more behind the bricks. The cloth-wrapped bundle, tied with string. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside, a folded letter, yellowed and unopened. A child's drawing of a man in a house, labeled Dad. A pocket knife with a cracked handle, and at the very bottom, a photo, black and white, curled at the edges. George Carroll standing beside a woman, and 4 children, all of them smiling. Nathaniel sat back on his heels, breath caught in his chest. This wasn't just a wall, it was a tomb. That night, he didn't dream. Or if he did, he didn't remember. But when he went to the basement the next morning, the notebook had been moved again. This time, a new message waited for him, still in his own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing it.
Thank you. One more.
One more.
What did it mean?
He took the letter upstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. He didn't open it. Not yet. It felt like it wasn't meant for him, like it was a message still waiting for the right hands. He turned back to the photograph. One of the children in the picture looked to be about 7 years old. A boy, standing closest to George, wide smile, crooked haircut, holding what looked like a paper airplane. Nathaniel turned the photo over.
There, in pencil,
B. Carroll, age 7, 1961. That child would be in his 60s now. That afternoon, Nathaniel made phone calls. He reached out to the town clerk, then the library, then the Veterans Registry. He spoke to Carol again, who remembered the children moving out of state, somewhere east, maybe Pennsylvania. It took days, but eventually, someone called him back. A quiet voice, male, slow.
Hello, this is Edward Carroll. You left a message about my father?
Nathaniel gripped the phone like it might vanish. Yes, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I think I found something of his. Silence. Then,
Are you calling from Elder Pine?
yes, the line went quiet again. Then Edward said softly, I've been waiting for this call for 60 years. Chapter 5. Echoes from the line. The voice on the other end of the phone was thin, like old tape stretched too far, but it carried the weight of 6 decades. Edward Carroll didn't ask many questions. Not at first. He listened as Nathaniel described the discovery in the wall, the photo, the dog tags, the bundle wrapped in old cloth. Nathaniel didn't mention the dreams. Not yet. He wasn't sure how to explain them to someone who hadn't stood in that narrow hallway of the mind face to face with a silent man in boots. I'm sorry if this is too sudden, Nathaniel said, unsure how else to put it. I thought you should know. There was a pause. Then Edward replied, No, you're right to call. He never left that house. I told everyone that. But they all thought I was just a kid trying to believe in ghosts. The line went quiet again, the soft hum of distance stretching between them. My mother wouldn't let us talk about it. Edward continued, said he left, said he didn't love us enough to stay. But I knew. I could hear him. In the walls, Nathaniel's breath caught. The others blocked it out. But I used to sit by the basement door at night, Edward said. Felt warmer there, like he was near.
They arranged for a visit. A quiet one.
Edward didn't want the press. He didn't want police. He just wanted to stand in the house where he last saw his father smile. He arrived 2 days later. He was tall, lean, and moved like someone used to folding into himself. His hair was silver, but thick, combed back neatly. He wore a simple jacket and carried no bags. Just a man with the look of someone who had waited most of his life for a door to open. They stood in the basement together. Edward looked at the bricks for a long time, not saying a word. Then he ran a hand across the exposed cavity where the dog tags and the bundle had been.
I remember this wall, he said. I remember hiding behind it during storms. It felt safe.
Nathaniel showed him the photo, the letter, the drawing.
Edward took the bundle with both hands, like it was a newborn. He didn't cry. Not then. He simply nodded, sat down on the old stool, and whispered, Thank you. They stayed there for a long while, without speaking, just the sound of the furnace above and the distant ticking of a wall clock. Then Edward asked quietly, "Do you ever hear him?" Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Yes, that night. They lit a candle in the basement. Edward placed the letter back inside the bundle, folded the cloth, and set it beside the notebook. He spoke aloud, though not in prayer. "Dad, if you're still here, I forgive you for whatever happened. I don't know why you stayed behind or what kept you hidden, but I want you to know we never stopped waiting." Nathaniel stood a few feet away, heart heavy, throat tight. The flame flickered, and then 3 soft taps echoed from within the wall. Edward smiled. After he left, Nathaniel found something new in the notebook. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a drawing, a simple sketch, childlike but unmistakable. A man standing beside a younger man, a house in the background, and above them, a sun with a smiling face. He turned the page. One more sentence scrawled across the bottom in blocky print. "You can rest now." Chapter 6. The second hollow. After Edward left, the house seemed to exhale. The taps stopped. The dream ceased. For a few nights, Nathaniel slept undisturbed. No whispered voices, no flickers of shadow in the corner of his mind, just silence. And for the first time since moving in, it didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. A peace, Nathaniel would learn, is rarely permanent in places where the past still breathes. On the 5th night after Edward's visit, Nathaniel awoke with a start. Not to a sound, but to a smell, the scent of wood smoke and something else, old tobacco, maybe familiar, but distant, like the inside of a coat left in a closet for too long. He sat up, heart steady, yet alert. He checked the furnace. Nothing. The air was still, but the scent lingered as he stepped down the basement stairs. And there on the table was the notebook. It had been opened again. Another message, but not in his handwriting. The pen strokes were shakier, uneven, as if written by a hand long unused. George was not the only one. Nathaniel froze. He turned the page. Below the message was a rough drawing, a floor plan, maybe, of the basement, but not as it existed now. There were outlines that didn't match, doors that weren't there, and most curiously, a second wall, one that had once stood behind the bricked section where George had been hidden, a wall that no longer existed, a wall that had been taken down, or perhaps moved. Nathaniel spent the next day combing through the town archives again. He dug deeper, going back further, before the Carrolls, before even the paved roads of Farrow Glen. He found blueprints, sketched in pencil and aging ink, dating back to the 1930s. The house had been built on old farmland, and originally, the basement had extended further, a root cellar, walled off, no longer listed in modern records, no longer accessible from any current entrance, except, perhaps, by breaking through. That night, the dreams returned, but they weren't of George. This time, Nathaniel stood in a space he'd never seen before, a small dirt-walled room lit by a single flickering bulb. Dust floated like snow, and in the center of the room stood a chair, empty. Beside the chair, on the floor, was a box, open. Inside, a collection of items, a child's shoe, a crucifix, a crumpled newspaper clipping, a small, broken mirror. He turned toward the wall in the dream, and for the briefest moment, he saw a woman's silhouette pressed against it. Mouth open, No sound, just hands pressed flat to the stone. Nathaniel woke to the sound of his own breathing, shallow, uneven, and the scent of tobacco still faint in the air. The message was clear. George was not alone. Chapter 7, Blueprints and Bones. Nathaniel didn't go back into the basement for 2 days. Not out of fear, but something deeper. A kind of reverence, like disturbing sacred ground. The silence in the house had changed again, become watchful. It no longer waited for him to speak. It simply observed. He spent those days upstairs, drinking weak tea and flipping through the old blueprints. He laid them out on the kitchen table, careful not to bend the edges, tracing the faded lines with a pencil like a man searching for veins in stone. The cellar marked on the diagram was unmistakable, a long narrow chamber beneath the far side of the foundation, opposite the wall where George's belongings had been found. It didn't connect to the rest of the house. No doors, just an outline, forgotten, buried, or hidden by design. And yet, there was no indication of it in the house now. No visible wall, no changes in the flooring, no access point. Still, he kept returning to the same corner in the basement, the one where the light never quite reached. The air there felt different, sterler, thinner. It reminded him of crypts he'd visited once in Paris, where the air sat heavier, as if morning itself. On the third night, he brought a chair and sat in that corner for hours. He didn't bring tools. He didn't bring his notebook. He just listened to the stillness, to the breath of old wood and slow time, to the house. And then, faintly, it came again. Not a tap, a whisper, not in his ears, in his chest. A phrase, muffled and submerged. Not words, but a shape of meaning, like memory brushing skin. He pressed his hand against the cold stone wall, and he felt it pulse. Not like something alive, but like something waiting. That night he dreamed, not of war, or basements, or fathers and sons. He dreamed of hands, hundreds of hands, pressed to walls, to floors, to ceilings, some small, some cracked with age, some burned, some clenched in fists, others reaching. He woke with tears on his face, and the overwhelming, unmistakable sensation of not being alone. He called Carol the next morning. Did anyone live in this house before the Carrolls? He asked. A long pause on the other end, a shuffle of paper. There was someone, she said finally. A family, 1930s. No one ever talked about them much. Something happened. Records aren't clear. Fire, maybe, or sickness, or something else. Back then, folks didn't keep the kind of notes you'd want. Do you remember their name?
I'll check, she said. But Nathaniel, sometimes history gets left behind on purpose.
He stood in the basement that afternoon, flashlight in hand. He knocked along the back wall with the handle of an old hammer. Wood, cinder, brick, hollow. He marked the spot and went upstairs to think. He didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, because of urgency, like something was trying, gently, desperately, to be remembered. Chapter 8. The room that wasn't there. Nathaniel didn't pick up the hammer again for 3 days. It sat by the basement stairs like a loaded question. He walked past it each morning, touched it once or twice, but never carried it back to the hollow wall. Something about the silence of that spot made him pause. It wasn't fear, at least not the sharp kind. It was a slower, older dread, a reverence for what might be sleeping behind it. The house, too, seemed to wait. No more dreams, no more whispers, as if it knew He understood now. This wasn't about one man. George Carroll was only the beginning, a single voice in a deeper choir. And so, on the fourth morning, Nathaniel laid out a drop cloth, moved the old shelf that leaned near the back corner, and set a small lamp on the floor, pointing it toward the base of the wall. He ran his fingers along the seam again. Then he began to work. The first layers were ordinary, just drywall and old plaster, layered over generations of patchwork. But behind that, deeper still, he hit something different. Wood paneling, thick, unpainted, smoothed by time. It wasn't part of the house's original structure. Someone had added it later, to hide something. He paused, wiped dust from his palms, and leaned in close. A faint gap ran along the base, thin, almost imperceptible. But and behind it, not insulation, air. He tapped once. The space behind the wood answered. He set the hammer down and retrieved a pry bar. He worked slowly, carefully loosening one panel, then another, until the outline of a long sealed doorway began to emerge. There were no hinges, blow handle, only a solid plank of forgotten history, and beneath it, carved faintly into the wood, nearly erased by paint and age, February 3rd, 1936. Forgive us. Nathaniel stepped back, heart thudding. What had happened in 1936, and why ask forgiveness from the inside of a wall? He didn't open the passage that day. Instead, he went upstairs, made tea, and sat by the kitchen window as rain began to fall. He watched the wind move through the trees at the edge of Elder Pine Road. Their bare limbs clawed softly at the grey sky. The storm didn't roar. It whispered, like the house, like the voices, like the grief that lived behind things. He didn't sleep that night, but he dreamed anyway. In the dream, he stood in the newly discovered room, but it was whole, untouched by time, lit by a flickering lantern, the air heavy with dust, and the scent of burnt matches. He could see them, figures in the corners.
Not ghosts. Not quite.
Just the memory of people. A mother holding a child too tightly. A man kneeling by a wooden beam. A girl standing alone in the center of the room, barefoot, hair matted, whispering a song he couldn't hear. All of them turned to look at him, and the girl spoke. Just one word. Remember. He awoke with his palms sweating and his throat dry. Downstairs, in the notebook, a new message waited, still not in his hand. Open it carefully. She remembers everything. Chapter 9. The room where the song ended. In morning, Nathaniel opened the wall. The sky hung low and silver. It was the kind of overcast that made even the birds fall silent, where sound felt muffled and the day stretched out like a held breath. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just stood before the sealed doorway in the basement, one hand resting on the wood, the other curled tightly around the cold metal of the pry bar. He whispered, "I'm sorry," though he wasn't entirely sure to whom. Then he began. The wood came loose, more easily than it should have. Each plank gave with only a little effort, as though the house had grown tired of holding its secrets. Behind the paneling was stone raw, ancient and damp, and then, when the last beam came free, air rushed out, cold, not rotten, not foul, just cold. And still, he reached for the lamp and raised it slowly. The space behind the wall was no larger than a storage room, perhaps 10 feet deep, 8 wide. The floor was dirt, pressed flat with age. The walls were uneven stone, carved by hand. No lights, no furniture, nothing that should have warranted fear. But it was not empty. In the far corner sat a chair, its legs sunken half an inch into the soil. Beside it, a worn leather shoe child-sized.
On the wall nearest the door, something had been scratched into the stone. Dozens of short lines, grouped in clusters, counting marks, like someone trapped inside had tried to measure time.
And in the very center of the room, the music box, closed, still. Nathaniel didn't move for what felt like an hour. He just stood in the entrance, staring into the small chamber, the air pressed against his skin. Not threatening, just dense with memory, with presence. Like walking into the middle of a long-forgotten prayer, he stepped forward. Each footfall sank softly into the dirt, disturbing a silence that had held for decades. At the center, he crouched and picked up the music box. It was heavier than it looked. The wood was pale and worn. The metal key at its side rusted red. He wound it once, twice. The spring clicked into place, and then, with a sigh that was almost reluctant, the box began to play. The melody was faint, uneven, old, a simple tune, a lullaby perhaps. Only a few notes repeated, but with each turn of the cylinder, the sound grew clearer, as if memory itself was being wound back into life. Nathaniel closed his eyes, and the room changed, not physically, but in the feeling of it. He wasn't alone. He turned, and there, near the wall, stood a girl, not flesh, not quite spirit, a shape, a presence, a figure built from shadow and dust and light. Her hair hung long and tangled, her dress old-fashioned and torn at the hem. She did not speak, she only looked at him, and then to his surprise, she smiled. It was small, almost sad. Then she raised her hand and pointed toward the counting marks on the wall, and vanished. Nathaniel sat in the dirt for a long time. Let the music play, let the dust settle again. Then he reached for his notebook and wrote what he could. Not for himself, not even for the girl, but because the house was remembering now, and someone had to write it down. Chapter 10, The Girl Who Waited. Nathaniel spent the next day in the library, buried beneath faded yearbooks, brittle census records, and microfilm reels that hummed and clicked with each slow scroll. Carol had reserved the back table for him, sensing without words that he needed space, for papers, yes, but also for grief. What he was trying to find wasn't just a name. He was trying to give the girl in the wall a place in the world again. She had been no more than 10 years old. In the vision, if it could be called that, her clothing placed her somewhere in the 1930s. Her expression was not one of terror, but of endurance, as though she had grown used to being invisible, and now found herself seen again for the first time in a lifetime. Nathaniel flipped page after page. His eyes burned. Dust clung to the edges of his sleeves. And then halfway down a column in an old Farrow Glen Herald from February 1936. Local family claims child lost to fire, but nobody found. The article was brief. A single paragraph. The house had belonged to the Bellamy family. The father, a miner. The mother, a seamstress. 4 children. 1 daughter, Clara Bellamy, aged 9, reported lost in a fire that began in the lower level of the home. Authorities responded to smoke, but found no structural damage. A few scorched beams, no flames. The Bellamys claimed Clara had been sleeping in the cellar when the fire broke out and was taken, but no remains were ever found, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of abduction. The county closed the case due to lack of physical evidence. No further stories were published. The family moved away later that spring. Nathaniel sat in silence, rereading the short article. Taken, not died, not burned, just taken. By what or whom? Or had the truth been worse? Had Clara been hidden, forgotten, left in that room beneath the earth, with only a music box and a chair? He thought of the counting marks. How many days had she waited? How long until she stopped marking? Back at the house, the basement felt heavier again. The opened room did not welcome or resist. It simply was, as if its purpose had never ended. The music box still sat in the center, silent now. He didn't wind it again. Instead, he walked to the wall where Clara had pointed. The marks were clearer now, hundreds of them, grouped in fives. Some shallow, some deep. He counted 1,183. 3 years, 2 months, and change. He stepped back and tried to breathe. That night, the dream returned. He saw Clara again, but this time, she stood outside the room, in the hallway. The same hallway George had once haunted. Her feet were bare, her arms wrapped around her chest, and she was whispering something to someone he couldn't see, a lullaby. The same tune the box had played, and as he stepped closer, she turned to him and whispered, "There are more." Then she was gone. He woke with the dawn creeping in through the cracks of the boarded-up windows, and a new page in the notebook written in the same faint, unfamiliar hand. "You found her. Thank you. But the house is not yet empty." Chapter 11. The house remembers. The next morning, the house felt different. Not colder, not darker, just heavier, as though it had shifted its weight during the night. Like an old building, adjusting after too long in silence. Nathaniel stood at the base of the stairs, his fingers resting on the rail, the dim light of dawn seeping through the basement window. He didn't go into the hidden room, not yet. Instead, he sat at the small desk, where the notebook lay open, where the pen rested beside the most recent message. "The house is not yet empty," he wrote underneath it.
How many are there?
No answer came, but then a noise.
Not a tap.
Not a voice, a soft dragging sound, like fabric against wood. It came from the second floor. Nathaniel hadn't spent much time upstairs since moving in. The upper floor was still half unpacked, dusty and dim, filled with old wallpaper that peeled in curling sheets, its faded patterns resembling vines, reaching out. He kept the doors closed, mostly. No reason to wander up there. Until now, he took the steps slowly. Each creaked like a question. When he reached the hallway, the sound had stopped. He stood before the middle bedroom, the one with the window that never quite opened, the one that always stayed a few degrees colder than the rest of the house. The door was ajar, just barely. He pushed it open with the gentlest pressure. Inside, the room was untouched. No furniture except a small dresser, a cracked mirror above it, and a bed frame with no mattress. Dust blanketed everything, but in the center of the floor, something had changed. Footprints, faint, child-sized, leading from the dresser to the far wall, and vanishing there, just below the window, and on the wall, etched faintly into the peeling paint. He called from the vent. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. He stepped closer. There, at the baseboard, nearly hidden behind an old panel, a rusted air vent, sealed with screws and warped at the edges from time and moisture. He knelt, ran his fingers along it. Cold air drifted out, faint but real, and beneath the slats, tucked barely within reach, was something wrapped in cloth. He pried it loose, hands trembling. Inside a small journal. Clara's name was on the inside cover. The pages were brittle, some torn, most yellowed to the color of smoke. They held no full sentences, just fragments, scattered thoughts, drawings, scrawled questions, repetitions. Where is Mama? Where is Mama? Where is... He said I had to wait. He said no one would come if I left the light on. I counted to 100. Then again. Then I stopped counting. There was a knock, but not for me.
The sim house is asleep. I think it forgets sometimes.
I am still here. Nathaniel closed the journal and held it to his chest. It felt like holding someone's heartbeat. He didn't cry, but he sat on the floor for a long time, letting the house settle around him, listening to the way the wind moved through the cracks, how it carried the sound of voices not yet remembered. And then, behind him, a whisper, soft, breathless, not from the journal, not from the notebook, from the vent. It said one word, below. Chapter 12. Beneath the bones. Nathaniel stood over the vent for a long time. Below, the whisper had said, not loud, not clear, but certain. The kind of word that doesn't ask for belief, only attention. He removed the vent cover with shaking hands, the screws groaning after years of rest. The duct behind it was narrow and dark, and far too small for anyone to have fit through, not even a child. But at its bottom, a shaft dipped sharply downward, disappearing into shadow. This was no ordinary air vent. This was a tunnel, a passage, a secret no house should hold. He retrieved a flashlight, its beam flickering slightly, and aimed it into the narrow shaft. The light traveled down 6, maybe 7 feet, before curving sharply to the left, vanishing into earth. Wood beams lined the tunnel, some splintering with age. It wasn't modern, it wasn't safe, it was old, and it had been used. There were marks on the walls, scrapes, grooves, and near the base of the vent, strands of hair, long and pale. He didn't touch them. Nathaniel didn't descend that day. He returned to the notebook instead, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote, "There's something beneath the house." A tunnel. Was it meant for Clara? No reply. Not until dusk. Then, the pen untouched, moved slightly across the page, like caught in a draft, and 2 words appeared. She followed. That night, Nathaniel dreamed of digging, of soil turning to ash, of breathing in damp earth until lungs burned and vision tunneled to a single flickering point of light. And in that tunnel, curled against the wall, a girl's silhouette, not Clara, older, wearing a wool coat and no shoes. She whispered over and over again, "Tell him I didn't run. Tell him I waited." When he woke, the pillow was damp with tears. Not his. He began researching again the next morning, shifting his focus from the 1930s to the 1940s, then 1950s, scanning through school records, family registries, police notes, even obituaries. Names flickered by like leaves in wind, most long forgotten, but one caught his eye. Eleanor Dunn, age 17. Disappeared in 1949. Last seen walking home from the town library. Lived 2 blocks from Elder Pine Road. Never found. No trace. Just gone. That evening, Nathaniel stood by the vent again. Flashlight in one hand, journal in the other. The notebook lay open on the floor, and across the center was one sentence. She went looking. Chapter 13. The tunnel of the unspoken. The floor groaned beneath Nathaniel's weight as he knelt by the vent, the edges of the tunnel gaping like a long-forgotten wound. He'd braced himself with gloves, a mask, and a headlamp, the kind used by cave explorers or miners, but none of it felt like enough, because it wasn't the dark that unsettled him. It was the memory stitched into the walls. The opening was tighter than expected. He had to slide in sideways, inch by inch, the flashlight swinging from his belt, dust pressed against his skin. Every breath tasted like mold, copper and damp wood. His shoulder brushed against support beams warped with time. Some cracked, others soft with decay. It was silent, except for his breath, and beneath it, barely audible. The softest hum. A voice. No, not words, a tone. A memory, echoing through stone. After several feet, the tunnel curved left. Exactly as he'd seen from above. The incline grew steeper, the dirt colder. He imagined, absurdly, that the house itself was exhaling through this tunnel, that its breath was what had guided Clara, and perhaps Eleanor too, into its forgotten throat. Then, abruptly, the space opened, a chamber no larger than a pantry, carved by hand. The earth was hard-packed, and the ceiling arched low enough that Nathaniel had to crouch. He shone the light around and stopped breathing. In the corner lay the remains of a blanket, tattered, stained, curled in on itself like someone had used it for warmth. Nearby, a shoe size 6, a hairpin, a small charm in the shape of a book. The earth had been disturbed here. He didn't need to dig to understand. Someone had died in this space. Someone had waited, and then he saw it, etched into the far wall, with something sharp. Dozens of words scratched over one another in chaotic layers. Some were names, some were prayers, some were just the same phrase, repeated again and again. I didn't run.
I stayed.
I stayed. I stayed. Nathaniel sat back on his heels, overwhelmed. This wasn't just a forgotten space. This was a confession booth for the forgotten. He opened Clara's journal, turned to a blank page, began writing.
Eleanor, I found your name. You didn't run. You were never lost. You were taken, but not by violence, by silence, by a house that swallowed stories.
He left the book open, then placed the charm gently beside it, and as he turned to leave, the hum grew louder, not harsh, not angry, just aching. The house was listening, and maybe for the first time in decades, it was beginning to understand what it had done. When he reached the surface again, dirt clinging to his skin, air rushing back into his lungs like wind into sails. The light upstairs seemed warmer. The notebook waited for him on the table. This time, it held no words, only a name, Eleanor, and beneath it, one more. Chapter 14, The House's First Secret. The message in the notebook, one more, sat on the page like a whisper. After a scream, Nathaniel had grown used to these small revelations, these fragments, but this one felt different. Not final, but closer to the source. He sat at the kitchen table as the sun sank below the trees. The notebook before him, Clara's journal beside it, the name, Eleanor, circled in his own pencil. He drew a slow breath and asked aloud.
Who is the last?
No reply came for hours, but just before midnight, something shifted. It wasn't sound that woke him, it was heat. The upstairs hallway, usually the coldest part of the house, had grown inexplicably warm, like breath filling lungs for the first time in years. Nathaniel rose slowly barefoot and stepped into the hallway. He didn't hear footsteps. He felt them, like pressure, just behind the floorboards, leading toward the attic. He had never been up there. Not once. The old folding ladder creaked under his weight. Dust fell like old feathers as he pulled himself upward. The air grew thick,
dry. Every beam seemed to pulse with age. The attic was cramped and dim, boxes stacked in corners. A trunk covered with a sheet, cobwebs stretched like slow-moving time. But in the far corner, half buried in insulation, he saw it. A mirror, tall, oval, framed in carved oak so dark it looked burned. It faced the wall, and in the dust before it, footprints, not child-sized, boot prints, heavy. Nathaniel turned the mirror slowly and froze, not because of what he saw reflected, but because of what he didn't. The attic appeared as it was, boxes, beams, walls, but he wasn't in it. No reflection, no flicker of movement, only the room, empty, except at the very edge of the frame. A figure, a man, standing in the corner of the mirror's world, facing away. Still, Nathaniel turned, heart pounding.
Nothing.
The attic was empty. He turned back to the mirror. Now the figure was closer, not violent, not looming, just there, waiting, and at the base of the frame, in a line of etched letters, so small they were nearly invisible, was a phrase in Latin, Dermes haeret, quod punet, quod non confititur. He snapped a photo and hurried downstairs. At the kitchen table, he looked it up.
The translation.
The house clings to what is not confessed. He sat in silence. The house wasn't just haunted, it was guilt-bound, tied not to death alone, but to secrets, to things withheld, stories unspoken, truths buried beneath wallpaper and floorboards. It had trapped them, not out of malice, but out of refusal. The house refused to forget what its people refused to face. He turned the notebook again. This time, the message had changed. He built the house. He buried the first. Beneath it, a name, faded, shaky, Samuel Dunn. Nathaniel stared at the page. Dunn, Eleanor's father, chapter 15. The man who built the silence. The name in the notebook struck Nathaniel like a cold wind. Samuel Dunn. He'd seen it before. A faint footnote in an old land deed when he was first researching the property. At the time it hadn't meant anything, just a name on a page. But now it glowed with significance. The man who built the house. The man who, according to the message, buried the first. He opened Clara's journal, as if some confirmation might be hiding between its pages. Nothing. Still, the room felt more focused now, like the house itself was leaning forward. The next morning, Nathaniel returned to the town archives, his face pale, sleep-deprived, jacket streaked with dirt from the crawl space. Carol took one look at him and didn't say a word. Say simply pointed him to the microfilm cabinet, then quietly brought him a cup of coffee an hour later. He searched records from the early 1900s, combing through deeds, probate documents, and handwritten correspondence filed in dusty folders. And there it was, a building permit, issued 1904, owner and builder, Samuel E. Dunn, property, Elder Pine Road, structure, private residence, partial stone foundation, 2 levels, with cellar access. The document was ordinary until the final notation. Basement extension, not to exceed 6 bund X bund, no secondary egress, not to be used as quarters. Handwritten, almost as an afterthought.
No explanation.
But something about the phrasing, not to be used as quarters, sent a chill through him. Later that afternoon, Carol found an article from 1907. It was from the Farrow Glen Gazette, yellowed and fragile. Local widow and infant found dead in root cellar of Samuel Dunn residence. Family tragedy suspected, no foul play determined.
There was no photo, just a few short lines. Samuel's wife, name withheld, and a child died of exposure. In the very cellar Nathaniel now knew was buried beneath layers of time and silence. No criminal charge, no funeral noted, no public grief, just a disappearance, sealed up like the room they died in. That night, Nathaniel sat in the attic again. He brought the mirror into the center of the floor, set a candle before it, and stared. He saw nothing at first, just the flicker of flame, and the familiar emptiness of his reflection not being there. Then, the shape appeared. Not a shadow this time. A man, tall, shoulders stooped, wearing a coat too heavy for the season. He looked exhausted, not monstrous, not violent, just hollowed out. Nathaniel whispered, "Samuel." The figure in the mirror turned his head, but not all the way. And then, to Nathaniel's astonishment, the man sat down in a chair that did not exist in the attic, in a room that only existed in the reflection, and wept. Nathaniel reached for the notebook. One new sentence had formed in the trembling handwriting. He loved them, but he failed them. And the house remembered. Chapter 16, the first rim. It rained the next morning. Not a storm, not thunder, just a slow, patient rain, the kind that washed dust off window panes and settled into the soil like old sorrow returning home. Nathaniel woke with a notebook on his chest, the word remembered still circling in his head like a slow-moving current. He went down into the basement before breakfast. He didn't bring tools, not yet. He simply stood in the far corner, beyond the spot where George had rested, beyond Clara's room, beyond the reach of light, and waited. And then he knocked. Once, twice. Silence. Then, faintly, a hollow echo.
Not like the tunnel, not like the vent.
This sound was deeper, earthier, a response, not from a space made to contain something, but from one made to hide. He marked the spot, not with chalk this time, but with a small candle, which he lit and left burning. The flame leaned slightly left, drawn by a current he couldn't feel. He lay flat on the ground and pressed his palm to the floor. It felt warm. That afternoon he returned to Carol, who had pulled 2 more articles from a restricted archive. The first was a letter to the editor, dated 9. Why do we let this town bury its shame beneath stone and silence? That house holds more than history. It holds memory and guilt, unshy. The second was a town council note, barely legible. Oval granted to seal the second foundation level at Dunn Residence. Terms: permanent closure. No record to follow. No blueprint. No plan. Just a decision to erase a space. To remove it, not just from sight, but from the town's memory. That night, Nathaniel returned to the corner of the basement with tools in hand. He worked slowly, quietly, as though not to wake something sleeping beneath the concrete. The floor was newer than the walls, thinner, poured over wood. After hours of chipping, lifting, clearing, he found it. Wooden planks, ancient, cracked. He pried them loose, one by one, and uncovered a stairwell leading downward into the dark. The air that rose was old, older than any he'd felt in the house. It wasn't foul, but it was weighted thick with loss, with unspoken words that had never left the room. They were spoken in. He descended slowly, flashlight in one hand, the candle in the other. At the base of the stairs, the room opened. Stone walls, packed dirt floor, a single cradle, empty, a broken locket beside it, and carved into the wall, barely above eye level. Priscilla, forgive me. Nathaniel sat and wept, not because it was horrifying, but because it was human. He could see it so clearly now. Samuel Dunn, carrying his wife and infant down here during a winter so bitter the pipes froze. A man who had built a house too proud to ask for help. A man who chose silence when sorrow came. A man who sealed the room and himself. When he came back upstairs, the candle still lit. The notebook held a new message. This was the first, and the house never forgot. Chapter 17. The act of naming. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen staring at the notebook, the last message echoing in the room like a distant piano chord that refuses to fade. This was the first. And the house never forgot. He understood now. The house was never cursed. It was remembering what no one else would, holding what no one else wanted, keeping the grief, guilt, silence, and love that had nowhere else to go. But now, maybe, it didn't have to hold it alone. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The air was soft, the ground damp and quiet beneath the soles of his boots. He stood out on the porch with his notebook in one hand and the broken locket in the other. Inside the locket, a faded photograph of a baby, and behind it, a tiny scrap of paper that read, Sarah, 3 months, light of my world. He whispered her name aloud, just once. Sarah. The wind moved through the trees. In response, not as an answer, but as a gesture of acknowledgement. That day, Nathaniel began to write, not messages in the notebook, not entries in Clara's journal, but names. He made a list in his own notebook at the kitchen table, a deliberate act of remembrance. George Carroll, Clara Bellamy,
Eleanor Dunn,
Sarah Dunn, mother, name unknown. He left space under each for a memory, a word, a description, even if it was imagined, even if it was only emotion. He was no historian, but he could be a witness. And that was enough. He made small plaques from reclaimed wood. He carved their names by hand, not perfect, not elegant, but careful. And then, slowly, over the course of several evenings, he placed each one where their stories had lived. One in the bricked recess where George's dog tags had rested. One at the threshold of Clara's hidden room, beside the music box. One in the tunnel where Eleanor had waited. And 2 at the base of the old stairs, in the very first room. When he placed the final plaque, a sudden stillness swept through the house. Not a silence of fear, a quiet of peace. That night, no dreams came, but when he awoke, he found something new in the notebook.
Not in handwriting.
In drawing, 5 small houses, side by side, each with a single window, glowing, and beneath it, a single sentence. Thank you for letting us be remembered. Chapter 18. The room without a door. The days grew quieter after the plaques were placed. The house no longer creaked at night. No cold spots lingered in the hallway. The tapping had ceased. The dreams had gone still. Even the attic, which once held its breath behind that ghostless mirror, now felt like any other dusty, quiet room. And yet Nathaniel sensed it wasn't over. Not yet. It began with a smell, not dampness, not decay. Lilacs, faint, sweet, out of place in autumn. He smelled it near the kitchen doorway one morning. Drifting in from the narrow back hall, the scent lingered, then faded. Hours later, it returned, this time at the foot of the stairs. The third night, it followed him into the basement, and when he returned upstairs, he found the notebook open to a blank page. The lilac smell now sharp in the air. A message slowly appeared. He found the remembered. Now find the one who hid. He stared at the words. Not lost, not taken, hid. Nathaniel spent the next 2 days mapping every inch of the house. Walls, beams, joists, vents, flooring, comparing blueprints from 3 different eras. He marked them with string and chalk and dozens of colored pins, and slowly a pattern emerged. A blank space,
4 feet wide.
9 feet long. No doors, no windows, no record of ever having been built. Just a void tucked behind the wall in what used to be the nursery, a room he'd only entered once, early on, before the dreams began. He returned there now. The air was neutral. Still, no visible sign of disturbance, but the scent of lilac was strongest here. He paced the far wall, measuring against his blueprints. He tapped, pressed, checked the molding for gaps, and there beneath the wallpaper, just above the floor, he found a seam, faint, crooked, hidden beneath decades of paste and paint. He peeled it back slowly. Behind it, a square outline, a door, no knob, just a small hole, the size of a finger. He hesitated. This wasn't like the others. The grief in the basement was heavy, but honest. This felt different. Not angry, but afraid. Still, he reached forward, inserted a finger, and pulled. The panel came away with a soft gasp of air. Inside, a narrow room, unlit, lined with mirrors, not full length. Not grand, just small, round mirrors, 20 or 30, hanging at uneven heights, some cracked, some fogged, and in the very center, a wooden chair, facing the far wall, empty. He stepped inside. The air was cold, but not lifeless. The mirrors did not reflect his face, not entirely. Some showed parts, some showed younger versions. One showed his father, one showed Clara, standing behind him. Another showed the man in the military coat, weeping silently, and one at the very center showed a woman he had never seen before, middle-aged, hair pinned up, eyes wet, mouth sealed shut. She looked at him from inside the mirror and mouthed the word, "Forgive." He stumbled back. The candle in his hand flickered wildly, and all at once the mirrors cracked. Not shattered, just fine fractures, dozens of them, spreading out from the center mirror like frost. He returned to the notebook and found only one word waiting. Mother. Chapter 19. The Silent Matriarch. The word in the notebook, mother, lingered longer than most. Nathaniel stared at it for nearly an hour. Notebook open, hand still covered in dust and wallpaper paste from peeling back the nursery's forgotten wall. The cracked mirrors had not moved since. The faint lilac scent remained, like perfume on old clothes tucked in the back of a wardrobe. It wasn't the scent of decay, it was the scent of preservation. The woman in the mirror hadn't cried out, hadn't tapped or whispered. She had only looked with a mouth. Forgive. He returned to the nursery in the late afternoon. Sunlight cast pale slats across the floorboards, spilling between the blinds in quiet rhythms. He opened each window slowly, letting in the fresh air, as though the house itself needed to breathe again. The mirror room was unchanged, silent, still the same wooden chair. The fractured reflections, but this time, as he stepped inside, something had shifted, and on the wall behind the chair, there, until now, a phrase had appeared, etched in the plaster, in faded pencil. I could not undo what was done, but I could hold it here, so it would never happen again. He reached out and touched the words. The wall beneath them felt warmer than the rest of the room. Alive. Nathaniel searched the town records again the next day, this time for any trace of Samuel Dunn's wife. There had never been a full obituary, no grave listed, no public mourning, just an early census entry from 1905. Martha Elaine Dunn, age 32, married to Samuel, one daughter, Sarah, and then she vanished from paper, but not from the house. He returned to the mirror room that evening with a single candle. He sat in the chair, faced the mirrors, waited. At first, nothing. Then, as the candle burned low, the mirrors began to ripple, not visually, but emotionally, like the room itself had taken a breath it hadn't drawn in 100 years. And in the central mirror, the woman returned, older this time, eyes dry. She looked tired, not haunted,
Not furious.
just tired in the way that only people who carried things for far too long can be.
Nathaniel whispered, Martha.
The mirror fogged over for a moment.
Then,
Cleared. She nodded once. He asked, "Why did you stay?" She did not answer with words, but the candle flame danced violently, then snapped out, and in the cold that followed, he heard only one word, low, and inside his own mind, protection. The notebook had something new the next morning, a single name, written in large, uneven letters, Sarah, and beneath it, she was not meant to die. She was meant to be remembered, but I could not carry her beyond the walls. Nathaniel understood now. Martha hadn't been trapped by the house. She had bound herself to it. She had turned grief into bricks, silence into beams, a home into a tomb that would never forget what she couldn't forgive herself for. The mirrors weren't for vanity or terror. They were her memory, all the lives she had watched through the cracks, hoping someone, someday, would finally understand. He closed the notebook, and for the first time since arriving, he said the house's name out loud, not the street address, not the county registry number, but the name it had earned, breath by breath. Martha's House, Chapter 20, Keeper of the Choir, Pussy. Nathaniel stayed, not out of obligation, not even out of purpose. He stayed because something inside him had become quiet in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not the numb quiet of grief, nor the sharp quiet of loneliness. This was different, a settled quiet, a hush that came not from the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. The house had changed, or maybe it had simply stopped resisting. The floors no longer groaned at night. The hallway no longer held its breath when he passed. The mirror room reflected only his face now, pale and honest. The notebook, once thick with handwritten fragments from hands long gone, now lay on the desk untouched, its pages still and blank as snow. No more tapping, no more dreams, no more waiting. He spent the next several days doing little and doing it deliberately. He listened to the house, how it moved, how it settled, how the wind sounded as it slipped through the chimney's old stone. He traced the cracks in the walls with his fingers, not out of worry, but out of curiosity. He sat on the basement stairs for hours at a time, simply breathing. He visited each room, one by one. George's corner, the bricks still half exposed, the dog tag hanging from a rusted nail, like a whisper that no longer needed to repeat itself. Clara's room, her music box still intact, the floor beneath her stool, smooth from years of waiting. Eleanor's tunnel, no longer frightening. Just a part of the house's bones now, clean and dry. And the first room, Sarah's room, the cradle gently dusted, the locket placed in a small glass case. The candles still burned each evening. He lit it out of memory, not ritual. One morning, Nathaniel stood at the front window as the sun rose, casting long golden light across the living room floor. He watched the dust drift in the sunbeams, listened to the creak of the porch boards in the wind, and whispered something he hadn't said aloud in years. Thank you. He wasn't sure who he was speaking to. Martha, George, the house itself, maybe all of them, or maybe no one. But the words came from the same place the tapping once did. He began leaving the front door unlocked during the day. Not wide open, just unlocked. He placed a small wooden sign in the window beside the front step. No hours, no fee, no name, only 2 words carved by hand. Memory house. Visitors hadn't come yet, but Nathaniel could feel them in the distance, like warmth carried on wind from far-off chimneys. Not people looking for thrills, but those looking for closure, for something they'd misplaced or left behind. That night he sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, wrapped in an old wool blanket, the stars watching silently from above the roofline. He looked up at the house, not as a keeper or a survivor or a mystery, but as a living thing, a quiet, breathing thing, not haunted anymore, just full. The notebook sat open beside him. No messages appeared, but he didn't mind. He picked up the pen and began to write, slowly, carefully, just for himself. I came here to forget. Instead, I remembered everyone else, and somehow that helped me find my own name again.
Chapter 21. Restoration.
Nathaniel began the work, not with a hammer, but with a broom. He started in the front hallway, where the baseboards had begun to separate from the plaster, not violently, but with age, like the sigh of an old man settling into a deeper kind of stillness. He swept the corners, lifted the rugs, scrubbed each stair tread by hand, even the ones no one would ever see. There was no schedule, no plan, just attention. And that, he was learning, was its own kind of care. In George's corner of the basement, he polished the bricks with a damp cloth. He didn't replace them. He didn't repaint the wall. He left the section exposed, a quiet wound that had long since stopped bleeding. He built a small bench near it and laid George's folded photograph on a cushion. Beneath it, a wooden plaque he carved with simple letters. George Carroll, father, veteran, forgotten too long. Above the photo, he penned a copy of the original newspaper article, now laminated and framed. He added a second clipping from decades later. Remains identified after 57 years. Closure for a family, not for tourists.
Not for curiosity.
Just for context, so no one would be just a whisper again. In Clara's room, he brought fresh linens and covered the floor with a soft, faded rug. He placed a small nightlight in the corner, and a copy of her drawing on the wall in a wooden frame, had it printed large enough that visitors could see every crayon stroke, every careful line of the little house, and the figure labeled Dad. Next to the stool, he placed a glass box containing her music box. He didn't wind it anymore. That wasn't his decision. He lit a lantern in Eleanor's tunnel, then lined the walls with wood to keep the moisture out. He mounted a plaque just above the bend where she had waited. Eleanor Dunn, 17. She didn't run. She stayed. He placed her charm, the tiny silver book, in a dish of polished stone. Visitors left notes there. Now, folded pieces of paper, bracelets, a dried rose once. None of it was removed. The house accepted every offering. Sarah's room, the first room, was the hardest. He scrubbed the steps gently, sanding each to smooth the old splinters. He left the cradle untouched, only adding a soft quilt sewn from linen he found in the attic. He stitched her name into it by hand, just once, in pale blue thread. Sarah. Above the cradle, he mounted the locket, opened, with the photograph facing outward. He built a small bench and added a sign, "Please sit with her." She waited a long time. He sat there often, not always thinking, just being.
And sometimes that felt enough like prayer.
The mirror room was the last. He didn't cover the mirrors. He cleaned them. One by one, most of them still refused to reflect. Some flickered, faint images, faces, sometimes, or fleeting movements that couldn't be followed, but they no longer fractured. They no longer watched. He placed Martha's name in the center of the far wall, carved in cedar. Martha Elaine Dunn, mother, the one who stayed behind so no one else would have to. He called it the memory room. He added a guest book. Visitors signed their names quietly. Some didn't leave anything but initials. One visitor drew a small house with a window glowing. Another wrote, "I think my grandmother used to hum that music box tune. I never knew where it came from." Nathaniel kept every page, because now the house was not just a house, it was a keeper, and so was he. Chapter 22, The Memory Room. The first person to knock on the door came in early spring. She was in her 20s, wrapped in a raincoat too large for her, with a faded backpack and fingers stained with ink. Nathaniel had left the front door unlocked. As always, the simple wood-carved sign still hanging in the window. Memory House. She didn't ask questions when he greeted her. She only said, "Is it true you keep stories here?" He nodded. She stepped inside. Nathaniel led her through the house, in silence. First to George's corner. She stood for a long time before the brick wall, her hands in her pockets, her shoulders hunched, not from fear, but from a kind of solemn agreement. When they reached Clara's room, she asked if she could wind the music box. Nathaniel nodded. The tune played, soft and uncertain, but full. The girl cried, not loudly, just two long tears that fell without resistance. In Eleanor's tunnel, she didn't speak at all. She crouched beside the plaque, touched the charm, traced the carved words with her index finger. When they returned upstairs, she paused at the foot of the attic steps. "Someone I loved used to talk to the ceiling," she said, "when they were little." Nathaniel didn't say anything. She nodded to herself. Then she left a photograph on the guest book table. No name. Just a young boy in a hospital bed, smiling at something outside the frame. She never signed the book, but her name stayed in the air for hours after. Others came slowly, in twos and threes. Some found it by accident. Travelers, writers, strangers passing through. Some came on purpose, carrying clippings and names written on napkins. A few came with nothing at all, and still found something to leave behind. One man, nearly 80, sat in the tunnel for over an hour. When he left, Nathaniel found a folded note that read, "I was looking for my brother. I think I found myself instead." Nathaniel began writing, not for profit, not for fame, just to remember. He called it The Ones Who Waited, part journal, part narrative, part obituary, part love letter. Each chapter dedicated to a person, each one beginning not with how they died, but with what they left behind. He wrote slowly, by hand. Each night he read his pages aloud, once in George's corner, once in Clara's room, and once by the cradle, not because he thought they needed to hear it, but because he believed they wanted to know someone still cared. He lined one wall of the house with shelves. Each visitor who left a story or artifact had a box, a nameplate, a photo, if they allowed it. The wall grew. never cluttered, never loud, but alive. The house, for the first time in its long life, was not carrying all the stories alone. It was sharing them. Nathaniel placed his own name on the wall one night. He carved it slowly into a plank of walnut, then set it beside the guest book beneath a small candle. Though Nathaniel Crow, listener, writer, stayed. He didn't feel morbid doing it. He felt accounted for. And in the mirror room, something changed. One morning, he stepped inside and saw that the cracks in the mirrors had vanished. Not all at once, but smooth, faint lines sealed like healed scars. His reflection looked back, and behind him for just a second. He swore he saw Martha. Not sad, not distant, just smiling. Then she was gone. Chapter 23. The Visitors. By the time summer settled over Elder Pine Road, the memory house had quietly become something of a rumor. No flyers, no advertisements, just stories carried from one kind stranger to another. In passing, over tea, sometimes at gravesides, sometimes whispered between people who couldn't quite explain what they had felt inside its walls. And still, Nathaniel kept the door unlocked. The visitors never came in crowds.
Always one at a time.
Or two, never more than three. They arrived in all weathers, in worn boots, in wedding shoes, in silence. Some alone, some hand in hand, with someone whose fingers trembled. A few carried folders, most carried nothing at all. They rarely asked questions. Only can I walk through, or may I sit for a while? Nathaniel always nodded. He never gave guided tours. He didn't need to. The house did the speaking now, not through walls or whispers. Those days were over, but through its rooms, through the rhythm of stillness, the warmth of floorboards, the way the music box would sometimes play, one perfect note as someone passed by Clara's doorway, or how the wind would lift the curtains slightly when someone paused in the attic, unsure of what they were looking for. One afternoon, a woman arrived just after rain. She was in her 60s, her jacket speckled with droplets. She carried no umbrella, no purse, only a small ceramic jar, wrapped in a red handkerchief. Nathaniel opened the door and stepped aside. She said, "I'm not sure why I'm here." "That's okay," he said. "The house probably is." She walked slowly through the rooms, touched the plaque in George's space, rested her palm on the vent in Clara's room, lit a candle near Eleanor's charm, then sat on the bench beside Sarah's cradle. For a long while, she didn't move. Then, gently, she placed the jar at the foot of the cradle. Nathaniel approached only when she rose. "What's her name?" he asked. The woman smiled, eyes wet. "Mine." Then she left. Nathaniel added her name to the shelf the next morning. Meredith. He didn't know her last name. He didn't need it. He carved a small card with a date and a line from her and brought her back to rest with someone who understood waiting. Not all the visitors cried. Some laughed. Not loudly, but with the soft surprise of recognition, as if the house had shown them something they hadn't known they'd lost. One child asked if Clara could hear him sing.
Nathaniel said, if she wants to.
The boy sang anyway. The guest book filled. Slowly, beautifully. Some wrote their own names. Others left initials, lyrics, recipes, riddles, lines from poems. One entry simply read, "I told my story out loud for the first time." It didn't echo. It settled, and sometimes, when Nathaniel sat alone with his tea by the back window, he'd see someone stop on the road outside, look toward the house, hesitate, then walk on. He never ran after them. The house wasn't for everyone. It was for the ones who had waited, and the ones who knew what that meant. Chapter 24, the anniversary. 1 year to the day. Nathaniel marked it, not with celebration, but with a candle and a slow barefoot walk through every room of the house. It was early autumn again, the leaves just beginning to drift, like tired letters, onto the road. The air had that same soft weight it carried when he first stepped onto the porch, but now it didn't lean on him. It moved with him. He began his walk just after sunrise. No notebook in hand, no pen, just silence and bare feet. He lit a candle in the kitchen first, the place where he had read the article about George Carroll, where the notebook had once whispered in shaking letters. Now it sat still on the table, a keeper of completed pages. He touched the wood beside it and smiled. Then he climbed the stairs. In the hallway, the wallpaper still peeled slightly near the vent. He'd never fixed it. He never would. He paused outside the nursery and closed his eyes. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and linen, and something else, not lilac anymore, but warm clay and dust in sunlight. He entered and sat beside the cradle. The quilt bearing Sarah's name still held its shape. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked the basement slowly, lantern in hand. At George's plaque, he knelt. "I never knew your voice," he whispered, "but I learned how to listen." In Clara's room, he did not wind the music box. He pressed one hand against the wall where she had once counted the days, and left a small shell he had found in the backyard, polished and smooth. In the tunnel, he crouched and traced the charm.
It no longer felt cold.
Only solid, only real. He saved the cellar for last. The original room. Sarah's room. Martha's grief. The room where the silence had begun and where it had finally been broken. He descended the steps and lit the lanterns. Each in turn, the air was still, not heavy, not haunted, just true. He read aloud, all of it, from the first page of his manuscript to the last, not performing, just witnessing the way the house once had. When he finished, he closed the journal gently and looked around the room. No whispers, no shadows, just quiet. Back upstairs, he opened the windows, one in each room, let the light pour in, watched it stretch across the floorboards like the long shadow of someone standing still in peace. And in the attic, when he reached the mirror room, something surprised him. All the mirrors reflected his face now, just him, calm, tired, present. He looked in the largest mirror and whispered, "Thank you." The mirror didn't ripple, but he swore, just for a breath. It smiled back. Chapter 25. The last message. The notebook had been still for months. No pages turned. No writing appeared. No dreams pressed into its corners. It sat on the table beside Nathaniel's tea each morning, the way a well-loved book rests after it's been read too many times. Edges softened, spine settled, no longer needing to be opened, but never quite ready to be shelved. On the evening of his 1-year anniversary in the house, Nathaniel opened it one last time. The pages were blank, waiting, not for instruction, not for intervention, just for closure. He sharpened a pencil, sat down, and began to write. To those who find this house, you may not know what you're looking for. You may come here with a name, a memory, a question, or with nothing at all but the weight you've carried, too long to name. This place will not answer everything, but it will hold you while you ask. These walls were once burdened with silence. Now they are lined with stories. If you are quiet and kind and honest,
the house will listen to you too.
Some ghosts do not want to haunt. They want to be understood, and some houses just want to rest. Please treat this one gently. I'm Nathaniel Crow. He signed the date. Then, carefully, he turned the page,
Left it open.
and walked away. He had almost reached the back door, tea in hand, when he felt it. That old hum, the one he hadn't heard in months. Not a sound, a feeling. He turned, crossed the kitchen, and looked down at the notebook. One final message had appeared beneath his signature, written in a steady, elegant hand. Martha's, perhaps, or the house's, or both. Now you are part of the story too. Nathaniel pressed his hand to the page, not to leave a mark, just to feel it. That night, the windows glowed with lamplight. The mirrors remained still. The music box did not play. The cellar candle burned softly beside the cradle. No one knocked at the door. No one whispered through the walls. But as Nathaniel drifted to sleep in his upstairs bedroom, the same one once filled with fear, he thought he heard footsteps on the stairs. Not approaching, just passing by. Chapter 26. The seasons settle. Time passed in the house like breath through sleeping lungs. It no longer marked its hours with knocks or creaks or whispers. It had no need to. The weight it once carried had been redistributed into names, into plaques, into stories held gently in candlelight and ink.
Nathaniel watched the seasons pass not with a calendar, but by the way the light changed.
Autumn returned first. The leaves on Elder Pine Road began to curl and drop, scattering gold and rust across the porch. The wind sang through the gutters with less urgency now, like it had nothing left to warn against. Nathaniel raked the yard slowly. He didn't mind the repetition. The rhythm reminded him of George's quiet steadiness, of Martha's patience, of the counting lines on Clara's wall. He placed a small pumpkin beside each room's doorway. Not decorative, not festive, just something living, something present. Winter came soft and early. The snow fell like memory. Slow, quiet, impossible to measure. As it arrived, the basement grew colder, but not unwelcome. Nathaniel lined the walls with wool cloth, added thick rugs to each room. He lit more candles in the evenings. He wrote letters. He read the guest book, like scripture. Visitors came less often, but when they did, they stayed longer. One woman fell asleep in the tunnel and woke hours later without fear. "Did someone cover me?" she asked. Nathaniel only nodded. He hadn't. Spring crept in, patient and pale. Shoots of green peeked through the cracks near the porch steps. A vine touched the window frame in Clara's room. Nathaniel let it grow. He didn't trim it back. He opened the windows each morning, let air run through the rooms like fingers smoothing pages. He left a glass of water on the table in the mirror room. It never evaporated, but sometimes it shook very slightly, like something breathing just beneath the surface. Summer was bright, but never loud. The boards no longer creaked with heat. The attic didn't sweat. The candles held their shape. Nathaniel spent more time in the garden, planting herbs and marigolds, which he left in small bundles on the guest book table. One evening, as he sat on the back porch, he watched a family walk past. A young girl paused, looked toward the house, and waved. He waved back. He didn't know her, but the house did. There were no more warnings in the wind, no chills that made him pause at thresholds, no more eyes behind the glass. There were only stories, stories that stayed, and a house that no longer needed to speak to be understood. Chapter 27. The letters that arrived. They started coming in spring. At first, 1 or 2 a month. Plain envelopes, no return addresses. No stamps, just tucked quietly between the porch railings, or beneath the mat, or slipped through the mail slot with the softest of sounds, always handwritten, always folded with care. Some were sealed, some were left open, as if meant to be read aloud. Nathaniel never asked for them, but the house had a way of inviting people without saying anything at all. The first letter was simple. 1 page. I don't know if she ever forgave me, but I dreamed of this house, and I woke knowing I had to say her name. Ruth. I'm sorry.
I remember your laughter. Nathaniel placed it in a box marked Ruth
On the archive shelf. No last name, no need. After that, the letters came more often. Some in cursive, shaky and elegant. Some scrawled in thick marker, misspelled and desperate. One was written in a child's hand, backward letters, uneven lines, and a single sentence. I hope you found your dog. Nathaniel placed it in Clara's room, and a week later, someone left a small, stuffed puppy beside the music box. One letter came wrapped around a single photograph. A couple standing beside an old car, smiling, sun in their eyes. The note read, "He never came back from that road. But if this house can remember, maybe it can keep this too." Nathaniel placed the photo in the mirror room. For 3 days afterward, the mirror's reflection held the car, faint, like a smudge in a memory. Some letters were full stories, pages upon pages of memory. Guilt, apologies, names long dead. One visitor wrote a journal, dropped it off at the door, and never returned. Nathaniel read it in the basement, 1 page at a time. Each entry was signed, from the one who should have knocked sooner. He built a shelf just for them. No titles, just wood and silence and space. People began writing to the house itself. You held her when I couldn't. I feel like you knew what I meant before I said it. You didn't punish me. You just let me see it. Thank you for not forgetting him. Nathaniel read each one, folded them gently, filed them carefully. The house never told him what to do with them. It simply listened and held them, like it held the names before them, like it always had. Chapter 28. The boy who asked about ghosts. He was 8 years old, and maybe 9. A wiry boy in a rain-speckled hoodie, with one shoelace untied, and a pebble in each coat pocket. He arrived with his mother on a mild afternoon, shy but curious. His eyes constantly moving, not in fear, but the way children watch things when they think something might blink back. His mother spoke quietly at the door. He doesn't sleep much, and lately he's been asking strange questions. Nathaniel smiled and nodded. They're often the best kind. The boy wondered, not nervously, not reverently, just presently. He knelt to examine the brickwork in George's corner. He hummed in Clara's room. He pointed Eleanor's plaque and asked if she liked books. Nathaniel said she left one behind, so I think she did. That seemed to satisfy him. In the mirror room, the boy froze, then turned slowly, eyes wide, not afraid, but full of something deeper.
Is this where the ghosts are? He asked.
Nathaniel knelt beside him. No, he said softly. This is where they waited. The boy turned back to the mirrors. Do they still wait? Nathaniel thought for a moment, then said, only if someone forgets to say their name. The boy nodded, serious as a preacher. Then, without hesitation, he walked to the center mirror and whispered, I remember you. Nothing happened. No flicker. No crack. Just the still, warm hush of a house that had learned to listen without expectation. And in that moment, Nathaniel swore the mirror softened, not visibly, but emotionally, like it sighed, faintly pleased. Later, while his mother spoke with Nathaniel in the kitchen, the boy returned to Clara's room and sat cross-legged on the rug. He took a sheet of paper from his pocket and a crayon from his sleeve. He drew a picture of the house. 2 windows, 1 door, a glowing room in the middle. In the window, a smiling figure with a swirl of light around it. He labeled it in crooked capital letters, "Someone who waits nice." Then he left it on Clara's bed. That night, Nathaniel found a copy of the drawing in the notebook. Not scanned, not traced, just redrawn by a different hand. Lighter, smoother, a bit older. A note beneath it read, "I used to draw her too. Thank you for remembering how." Chapter 29. The night it rained inside. It happened in the middle of summer.
No thunder.
No lightning, no warning. Just after 3:11 a.m., Nathaniel woke to a strange sensation, a kind of pressure in the air, like something invisible had exhaled. He lit a candle and walked through the house, barefoot. Nothing unusual. The boards were still. The wind was quiet. The moonlight fell in clean angles across the hallway floor. But when he opened the door to the mirror room, he stopped and listened to dripping. It wasn't leaking from the ceiling. There was no storm outside, no burst pipe. The mirrors were weeping, not melting, not crying in any grotesque, haunted way, but beading with condensation, soft, slow droplets forming on the glass, running down in delicate, winding paths, as if each pane had remembered something it had carried too long. And now, it was letting go. He didn't rush to wipe them. He didn't open a window. He sat in the wooden chair in the center of the room and watched the droplets form. Some stopped midway, clinging like thoughts unsaid. Others slid to the edge, pooled, and fell. It wasn't sadness. It was release. Each mirror wept differently. Some fogged over and cleared again. Some shimmered like the inside of a dream. But none of them cracked. None of them whispered. They simply let the house breathe out. He stayed until dawn. When the sun crept across the floor, the mirrors had dried completely. Not a single streak remained. Just light, soft, quiet, final. He left the room and poured himself a cup of tea. Didn't speak. He didn't write. He just looked out the window and thought.
That was goodbye.
Not from the ghosts, not from the house, from the memory of burden. He felt light in a way he hadn't since the very first knock on the wall.
In Chapter 30.
A quiet birthday. Nathaniel woke early. He always did, but this morning was different. Not because of his age, but today quietly marked another year of it. No balloons, no cake, no calls expected. He hadn't told anyone, but the house had noticed. He stepped out of bed and found a fresh breeze drifting through the upstairs hallway, though no windows had been left open. It was warm, familiar, scented faintly with cedar and something like tea leaves and distant baking. When he entered the kitchen, the morning sun pooled across the table like it had been poured from a pitcher. On the counter, where he always placed his cup, sat a clean folded napkin and a single pear, ripe, firm, and just beginning to soften. He hadn't bought it. He didn't wonder how it got there. He just smiled and sliced it in half. He walked the house slowly that day, one candle lit in each room. He didn't tend to visitors, didn't write, didn't speak, just visited each space, like one might visit old friends on a quiet afternoon. He sat in Clara's room and hummed the music box tune softly to himself. He laid a flower in the cradle room, a marigold from the garden, slightly bent, but bright. He traced the nameplates on the wall with his fingers and whispered each one. Then he whispered his own. Nathaniel Crow,
Listener, writer, stayed. In the afternoon, it rained lightly, just enough to draw soft rhythms on the roof. He brewed tea and carried it to the mirror room. All the mirrors were still. But in the far corner, on the small stool no one used, sat a folded slip of paper. No handwriting, just a drawing, a house with one glowing window, and a single figure inside, the same shape he'd seen in the boy's drawing months ago. Only now, the label beneath it read, "The one who stayed with us." He left the paper there, didn't speak, but the house felt his thank you. And in the quiet hours of evening, as the sky turned lavender and the windows cooled, Nathaniel sat on the porch and turned another year older. Not with fanfare, but with presence. A house behind him, a life around him,
A memory beside him.
and the soft certainty that nothing, truly nothing, had been forgotten. Epilogue. Stillness. Years passed like seasons in the grass. Slow, green, golden, gone. Nathaniel stayed. The hair at his temples turned silver. His hands grew slower, but never still. His handwriting softened, but never stopped. The garden bloomed in new ways each spring, not because of planning, but because seeds carried themselves on the wind. He didn't count visitors anymore. He didn't track letters. He didn't need to. The house remembered for him. Children who had once whispered now returned as adults, quieter, older, often with someone they loved, sometimes alone. Some brought their own children. Some came with urns, with letters, with photographs folded too many times. One man left his wedding ring beside Eleanor's plaque and wrote only, "She didn't come back, but I knew I could leave this year." Nathaniel read it with the same reverence he once gave to every message in the notebook. Then he nodded and filed it beside the others. The house by then had grown softer. The walls held heat better. The floors no longer groaned under his step. The mirror room stayed clear. The basement never leaked. No more strange drafts.
No more tapping.
Only light, filtered, warm, steady. Nathaniel grew older, slowly, gently, like the way fog lifts from a field at dawn. One winter morning, with snow settled like a blanket over the porch and chimney smoke rising in the still air, he sat in his favorite chair with a blanket over his knees. He sipped tea, read, listened to the house, breathed, and then smiled. He didn't leave a will, only a letter tucked in the final pages of the ones who waited, sealed and unsealed all at once. It read, "If you find this house, let it keep what you cannot carry. Light a candle, say a name, then sit in silence."
That's all it ever needed.
They say the house still stands, that someone new keeps it now. They say the front door remains unlocked. The rooms are just as they were, warm, worn, waiting, and if you sit long enough, sometimes you feel a hand on your shoulder, not cold, not heavy, just enough to say, "I'm still here. You are too." The end. You've reached the end of tonight's story. If you're still awake, thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep well. The Sleep Narrator.